disguised. No, not disguised. It's commodity being presented as a service. But, like it serves us. We're the people using it for social media.
Mm-hmm.
But we also generate a byproduct of data, which they sell, and that data is a commodity to other companies in the private sector. So yeah, that's an interesting way to look at it, I guess.
There's an example. When did I hear it? Oh, I'm reading this book right now called Digital Minimalism. The author is what's his name?
Cal Newport.
Cal Newport. It's okay. It's a good book. There's like some. He's not an avid social media user, but it is. It's got some interesting insight. It does come from a place of like a lot of privilege, I think, because a lot of the suggestions that he makes as far as like what we should do in order to like curb our social media addiction is not really realistic, and it takes into account like very Western social structures. Anyway, he made the analogy between the shift in traditional news reporting and newspapers and print and copy, and the shift that went to like the tabloid sensationalism that like the Hearst family, or like, so I forgot who it was, but it was the editor-in-chief of The Sun basically said, we stopped looking at the readers as the customers, and we started looking at the advertisers as our customers. And the same thing happened in news media. Social media is predicated on it. Like, I think that's what it was built on from day one.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's an interesting topic, because I always use the analogy between like disruptive technologies and our oversight tend to be, 20, 30 years down the line, like the advent of the car. Anytime a new mass technology is introduced upon the population, it takes them a couple decades to realize, like, oh, we need seatbelts, or oh, we need traffic signs, or oh, we need like traffic laws and government oversight and protocol procedure on like how those things function to stop the amount of deaths that happen.
Right, and that's why they say laws are written in blood. They're reactive by nature, unless you can do a super effective, risk analysis of certain laws and have the amazing foresight to see how they look 20 years down the line. Like, by nature, they are reactive, because we're like, oh, that was an unintended consequence. We need to fix that. And then, boom, you have a new law.
And whether or not, folks know at the time, the morality is not retroactive and legality is not retroactive. You can't, but you don't know the unintended consequences of technology or actions, 20, 30 years down the line. But, it's interesting because it kind of encompasses even this podcast. Like, we use digital mediums to distribute and talk about ideas. So it all exists inside of that, like, realm. And I just think as a society, will we ever figure out how to use it effectively, doing the least amount of harm? There's people talking about it, but I don't know. I have friends that are in the IT industry that think it's like social media is the absolute worst thing that has ever happened. And they don't think that there'll ever be a balance and enough oversight from the government to be able to stop the harm that it caused to society.
Well, and like there's a level of social responsibility that has to come with using services like this. Services that I said the word. No, that comes with using something like social media and responsibly. I think it affects like younger people the hardest. Like there are laws in place, like you cannot have a social media account until you're at least 14 years old. Mm-hmm. But it's like, man, like, do we need to raise that age limit? And also, how effective are the policing tools of that age limit for young people using Instagram or Facebook. Most of the harmful content you see on Facebook or in social media, I shouldn't say Facebook, that you see on social media, it's targeted at these young people. I mean, that's how you get like children with extremist views and these really negative, derogatory views. Young boys are being subjected to negative information and negative stereotypes and negative beliefs about women and about men in general. Like the whole alpha beta male bullshit is, I mean, how much of that is predicated with exposure to social media?
The incel alpha beta male pipeline. You're dealing with two different consequences: the psychological consequences of upon a certain population, the demographics. Primarily, you're talking about youth, and then you're also dealing with the like intentional manipulation of disinformation, because there's actual like psychological ramifications, and there's studies that have been done of like the amount and the increase of like usage of social media reflected in users between the ages of like 10 and 15 has increased anxiety and depression. I don't know if this is like noted, but like I would even say it could even increase like teen suicide. And then you're also on the other end of that, you're dealing with actual concerted efforts from folks, organizations, agendas that are using social media as a form of that disinformation. So it's like twofold. Like you have those in unintended consequences of like the psychological trauma that it's causing on the youth, and then you also have like the bad actor organizations that are using it, like the Cambridge Analytica scandal, 2016, the Russian disinformation campaigns. I mean, there's congressional hearings that have been going on for the last couple years, primarily with like Zuckerberg. They did one with like TikTok. I think we haven't figured out, because it's such a new, like we didn't know that the information industry, the private information industry, was going to be a multi-billion dollar industry. And that's why there's so much power around the lobbying of like not allowing any kind of government regulation to come into place. But like if we're going to, like you said, like it always takes something to break the camel's back, or like something drastic to happen for folks. But like I feel like we have the evidence. There's just the case against that to fight a multi-billion dollar corporation to create regulation. Like you look at the you were mentioning the incel alpha beta male pipeline. The guy, like a lot of the like mass shooters that have
that's exactly where I was going to go with that.
Yeah, they released their manifesto on either Twitter or did a live stream. Like I think the one in New Zealand in Christchurch was live streamed on Facebook. Like that's wild.
I think the question shouldn't be, do we demonize them, or do we study what happens? It's very easy to look at someone who commits such a crime and be like, they're a monster. But I think that's dismissive. I think that's really dismissive of our responsibility as humans, right? To understand how things affect us psychologically. Like, oh, he was a monster, he did that. No. He was a human being who was far down a rabbit hole into believing these dangerous things and did not have the psychological tools to regulate their emotions or whatever. Like, I guess what I'm trying to say is, like, it's so easy to look at these atrocious things that happen and go, oh, they're a monster, or, that's a fundamentally evil person. But it's like, no, they weren't born that way. Something happened to them. Mm-hmm. And what we're discovering is a lot of that the negative views, their beliefs, their insecurities that get turned into actions, a lot of that can probably be rooted to social media and the things they're exposed to. When you have people who are online and are creating content and are saying these negative things about women, about young men or whatever, I mean, I don't want to name any of these people because I don't want to expand a platform for them in any way. They say bad press is good. All press is good press, right? Not that we're movers and shakers
something
in
that
any
rhymes
industry of any
with
kind.
Schmandrew bait.
There you go, Schmandrew Bate. Yeah, there you go. Or Fjord and Jeterson. You know, people like them. It's they impose these stereotypes, these expectations on what it is to, be a man. And these are that's such a nuanced topic. You can't sum it up in some video, or you can't define what it is to be a man based on how many women you're sleeping with. And the alpha beta discussion, it's just, it doesn't exist really. That's not a thing in human biology. It's not even a thing really in wolf biology, where they like to go the alpha male of the pack. That's not a thing. That's been debunked for years, for decades. That's not been a thing. But we hold on to it because it's easy to compartmentalize our insecurities and our viewpoints of other people. For some reason, I guess it's just harder for kids to communicate the message that people are different and that we look differently and that we think differently and we value things differently. No, we have to define ourselves apparently by how many people we sleep with, by what type of beer you drink, by what TV shows you watch, by who you vote for. It's all in an attempt to make it easier, but then you have those irresponsible people that we named who profit off of that. They monetize it.
The biology that they should be looking at, which is glaringly there, is the us versus them in group. That's kind of what we're in. Is we like to scapegoat things, the unknown or things that we don't understand, and
there you go. Yeah,
easy explanations to say whether the root of all. The root of all your problems come from XYZ or come from this people group. That's been used just because it's rooted into our biological hardware to be dubious of the out group, because we don't know if they're carrying disease, we don't know what their intention is. So using that in the sense of we haven't really figured out how the immediacy of social media and how quickly information is divulged to really have a vetting process of whether or not something is factual, but they're playing on our base biological instincts to have fear, because that's where it's have fear of whatever it may be. And there's a lot of money being made off of just our monkey brains.
No, yeah. Dude, it is our monkey brains. It's our need to be entertained and our need to fit in. And you always say everything is content. Whatever you make, it's content. Get that out there. And I do want to, with the podcast specifically, I want to increase numbers. I want people to listen to the podcast. But it's more important that I'm making something than it is to me that I have 1 million people watching or listening or seeing what I'm doing. I get more enjoyment of creating, having these conversations and chatting and just making something and putting it out into the world than I really care about the returns on investment. You know what I mean?
That's a really important point, because we tend to always talk about the negatives of social media and the vapidness of social media. And you just mentioned something very important. When you utilize a tool like social media and you utilize it in a way that it's gelling with your desires or your what the outcomes that you want for your life, you can create things with those platforms, with those technologies that are worthwhile and that are important for you as a human being, and that other people will get value out of it. And it's we tend to always talk about the negative, the ills of social media. There is this, for example, being able to utilize those things, and in the context of just one song, and in the context of being a singer-songwriter or producer, composer, you're utilizing these tools, connecting with folks that, I just met a band from Seattle called Shark Legs on TikTok. I just talked to a band from Texas within this last week, and you bounce these ideas. And I think within the medium, using the interface to increase the art, to push the art forward, that's the beautiful thing of it. But with that comes the double-edged sword and all the baggage that comes with the negativity of it. And then also keep it in mind, okay, have I been on Instagram and TikTok too long? It's very tough to gauge for me because it's part of my job. I have to be on those things all day long. But Yeah, governments see the need of it. It's a way. It's an equity issue too, as far as like how can, you know, digital literacy is varies greatly, but for the most part, you know, folks have access to a cell phone, and sometimes it's the first time that some folks ever have an interaction, a positive interaction with the big bad quote unquote government or the police, or you know, these like kind of like abstract entities to most folks that, you know, live in society. They're able to kind of have a forum with and everywhere from like municipal government, state government to the federal level of like you can tweet at the White House, right? When in history has that ever been possible that you can get a message in front of, you know, their press secretary, or you know, whoever's running their social media? As artists, creators, musicians, how do we leverage social media to create community, and to push the art forward without also bringing along all the negative baggage that comes with social media? And that's a fine line to it's a very fine line to walk. And for me, perfect example, there's a difference between inspiration and jealousy, and I'm sure other people can relate to this. You see an artist, you see a guitarist, for example. I play guitar. I see a guitarist on TikTok or Instagram or Facebook, and I'm like, oh, that guy's badass, or that girl shreds. I want to look like. And there's that inspiration piece. But then there's also that fine line of like, where do you need to kind of keep yourself in check and be like, all right, not, you know, don't be jealous. If you're going to use it to push your own personal craft forward. And that's a conversation with like, you know, just the negative thinking processes that we have around social media. It's tough.
Well, I think that the important point on that is intent matters with what you're doing with your social media. Like, you do social media for a local government, right? But the intent for using social media for the government is to connect people with their community, to inform people of events occurring in their neighborhood, you know, so they can go out and be a part of this community and not sit around on your computer all day, right? Or be aware it's to inform the public, basically, and get the public involved. It's kind of like, you know how people get annoyed when you see like advertisements for attorneys just all over the place? They're actually performing a civic duty by advertising their services, because, you know, a lot of people may not know that, you know, you can retain an attorney for something. Or, you know, when you see like a class action lawsuit advertisement, some people don't know they've been wronged. It's to let them know, like, hey, if there's been something wrong with you, there are services out there, there's people out there whose job is to help you. You know what I mean? So it's the service, it's the intent. And I think the same thing can be said for like creating something and putting something out there. And you'll start to recognize the patterns too. Like, the more you scroll through social media, like when I scroll through Reels or something, you can tell what's there just to get you to waste your time, versus someone who's sharing a craft, or someone who's there to legitimately entertain you rather than just piss you off. Like those videos where people like make those ridiculous plates of food where it's just like they're just wasting like hundreds of dollars worth of food for a video. Like, why? That's negative social media to me. That's unnecessary. You're wasting resources. It's rage baiting. Isn't that the term? Mm-hmm. It's rage baiting. You're baiting people to be pissed off, and that's your content. So I think intent is seriously what matters when it comes to this type of discussion. And the more wholesome the intent, the better the material. And, you know, it's not all a waste of time, I don't think. Not all of it. A lot of it's informative. We like to be entertained. You mentioned the monkey brain, but I think to me, that's where it matters. So at least with the podcast, my intent is just to make stuff and share it, and whoever watches.
That's a great point. I also think the reach, like your intent may be, you know, to provide resources, services, or just, you know, public knowledge, which is great. Mm-hmm. But these platforms, and this is back to like the negative side of the algorithms of these platforms, want you to rage bait. They want you to argue like the talking heads do on, you know, the nightly news. And that's the most engaged content. And that's us. I even thought as far as going of like creating like civics policy and classes to inform the general public, because the average user of social media doesn't know all the like litigation that's actually happening around social media, and like people talking about in court and like in the highest courts of the land about the intent versus the impact of social media. So I honestly think that we need to get to a point where we're informing the general public the same way that we do. You know, if you want to get to, go drive a car, because you need to be informed about the laws and the regulations and like what the good and the bad is of any kind of interface that you use. You know, like if you're going to go swimming at the ocean and there's a riptide, they'll put a sign out that says, "Hey, there's been reported riptides here." I think it's the civic duty of us as like not just the government, but just as like a society. You know, we haven't figured out the proper usage of this stuff yet.
Yeah, you make a good point. Like, what sort of disclaimer can should there be a disclaimer added to social media for the sake of the young people using it, you know, or the easily susceptible, like, warning, using this platform, may construe ideas that may or may not be accurate, that type of thing. Or it's such where is that ethical duty drawn by the communities, and how do you regulate that sort of thing? Where I work, we have things like an obstacle course, and the obstacle course is to be used by members of the program who use it. But we can't just stop people from using it. We can't be policing that obstacle course all around. So there's some social responsibility that exists. So what we do is the workaround is you slap a sign on there. And that sign says, hey, like, obstacle course must be used with an instructor present. But no one's out there policing. What that does is that saves us, that protects us from liability.
Yeah.
If someone gets hurt. Hey, we've informed you. You can't use this without this. You need to know this is dangerous. If you're going to use it, you can't sue us if there's no one out here using it. You know what I mean? So in one sense, is there a way to motivate these companies to have these sort of disclaimers, A, to protect them from liability on some sense, but also B, to help limit them, help them with when they police their platform? Or will it have the opposite effect? We put that liability up there. You chose to go on and use the service. Guess what? We're not policing it. You're going to see hate speech. You're going to see all sorts of negative stuff on there. And I think that's likely what would happen. Over time, you put that disclaimer up, people are going to use it, and they're going to see some shit they don't like. And you know what? That can be some very harmful material. So maybe the disclaimer not being there is important because it forces the social media platforms to police the comments, to look at things and do their best to keep it at bay.
At the end of the day, they're also private industries, and the moderation relies within their own individual policies. So
yeah. So how far should the laws go when it comes to regulating? How do you protect the younger people using it?
I mean, or just the general population. There's a good example that I was thinking of when you were mentioning the usage of that obstacle course. We have liquor and alcohol laws nationally in the United States. You have to be 21 years old to purchase alcohol. The law and the way that policy plays out is if I go into 7-Eleven, I'm a 36-year-old man, and I buy beer, they do their due diligence and they adhere to the law by checking my ID and making sure that I'm not visibly intoxicated.
Right.
The second I pay for that beer and it's mine, and I leave 7-Eleven and I give that beer to a 16-year-old kid that asked me to buy beer, they are no longer liable for the outcome. I am. The user is. So
correct.
That's almost like kind of what we're at. We're reconciling with January 6th, again, perfect example. What is the liability of the platform itself? And in the Facebook papers around January 6th, there's damning evidence of them pushing that narrative and allowing things to go that created the situation on January 6th. But then there's also individual prosecution from the FBI on the folks that perpetrated that thing. So it's like hand in hand. So are you gonna slap a fine on 7-Eleven because they sold me, the person that actually broke the law, or are you gonna prosecute the person that broke the law, which is give the beer to an underage kid?
Yeah, you're right though. You can't. It'd be one thing if the 16-year-old kid used a fake ID and the cashier failed to spot it. Like there's criminal implications for the kid with the fake ID, but even more so for the guy who sold it. It's like, dude, you didn't check it, you didn't catch it, and it's like, okay, but the fake ID was super convincing, that type of stuff. You're right. Like, is it the responsibility of the user? But at the same time, like, we use the term hate speech, but like, here's the kicker, Leo. Hate speech is protected speech.
Yeah, it's not illegal. Exactly, and there's no definition for hate speech. Like,
right.
It's contextual based off of the person interpreting.
It's intentional too, because first of all, how do you define what hate speech is? You know what I mean?
Exactly.
You're right, like you said, it is subjective. But then who's going to be enforcing that? If you make that a law, there's no guarantee that the person who's going to now be enforcing the hate speech laws is going to be agreeing with your definitions. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Like, it has to be subjective. It cannot be an objective law in there unless it's something that causes physical harm, because physical harm is measurable, right? Assault. We can talk about harassment. That's something we can measure. But like putting a swastika on the side of a building, that's graffiti. Can they prosecute for the hate speech? Maybe not. Maybe. It depends on who's interpreting, right? It depends on as I understand it, it depends on the level of outrage and harm, real harm that it does. I don't mean to say that psychological distress is not real harm, but real as in measurable harm.
Yeah. That's a funny thing to think about too, because as like technology progresses and there's abilities to actually measure the amount of like psychological distress on like populations, I wonder if that will ever make its way into court to be like, you can measure the amount of harm that it caused this community in Flint, Michigan, or, because we ran neuropathy tests on this population and they are all suffering from XYZ.
Yeah. And that's the thing, like some dude like standing in the middle of a crowd and shouting the N-word, right? Or shouting that at someone, like you can prosecute that person for disturbing the peace, right? If they're out shouting it, they don't necessarily have to be shouting the N-word. You can be shouting like I don't know, rollerblades, or you can shout whatever you want. But if you're shouting loud enough, dude, you can be fined for disturbing the peace. It isn't what you're shouting, it's that you're shouting loudly. But if it's something like the N-word and you're causing distress, however the judge, if charges are pressed against you by whomever, however the judge is going to interpret what you're saying, I mean, that can add added weight to what you're doing. But the charge is still disturbing the peace. You know what I mean? There's a maximum sentence for different types of crimes. What you don't have on social media is the volume. You don't have someone out there shouting and shouting the N-word in public is different than making a post, because you have a responsibility as a user. You have the ability to block that person. You can report that person, and as a private institution, as a private company, they can block that person. They can put them in, social media jail. That's something they can do within their rights, because a private company can have a code of conduct. No shirt, no shoes, no service. You know what I mean? Like, if you're going to use disruptive speech, you don't have to use our platform. If you're not going to come here and play nice per our community standards, you can't be a part of our community.
Yeah, I think that, so that example of like the usage of the N-word, right? Other than like, that's the low hanging fruit, and that's the example that most like of the conversations that I've heard around social media policy,
right, But
comes
it's a very
from.
illustrative example.
But it's
That's why
also
I
like,
used it.
how often do you see, like, and I'm, as a moderator and on social media, you don't, that's not the kind of hate speech, that's not the explicit kind of hate speech that you see,
Oh, sure.
or that
Sure.
we've seen in the past that has arisen to actual. It's more so. A perfect example is the manifesto of the San Antonio shooter, listed several episodes, or listed specifically an episode from Ben Shapiro talking about like the invasion of America by, like, the Latinx or Hispanic population. That's the kind
Right.
of like real world implication of, like, but then again, like, that draws out, there's actual harm. But yeah, the we don't allow hate speech is a very subjective hate speech. You and I may not comprehend a hate speech dog whistle because we're not part of the queer community, but someone that's part of the queer community can. Or, for example, like, I may find something offensive as a Latino, but you or someone else wouldn't see that because they're not a part of that community. So policing hate speech is not from like a First Amendment perspective. There's not really any legal precedents that would hold that up. But from a private organization perspective with policy, the moderation is in the court of those. But like, that's where I think the regulation and the law comes into place. It's like, you could, as a society, we can demand stricter or more stringent policy procedures from those private entities through law.
Yeah. Yeah. We can. Or we maybe finding a way to incentivize these companies to have a more wholesome approach. But I mean, then you got to measure how far is too far. How far are you going to go? But at the same time, we have to understand, or not understand, but we've observed that, like, like Truth Social, it's not super popular as far as I understand. Like, yeah, you have people using it, but it's never going to be at the levels of Facebook or Instagram or even TikTok. You know what I mean? It's going to stay very niche, and it's going to be policed in their own way. So then you have to measure, like, okay, what sort of, public harm can something like Truth Social do? And then you get our answer, the January 6th.
Yeah.
The January 6th, where it's like, oh, it was used to coordinate a coup, an attempted coup in the United States. And it's like,
it's funny to me because the libertarian and argument of, like, oh, that's government overreach and they shouldn't have control, they're taking away our freedoms, like, back to the whole, like, the reason we have regulation is because people's houses were falling on top of each other, people were getting electrocuted, cars were killing an exorbitant amount of people. Like,
there's poison in our food.
There's poison in our food. There was lead in our paint. The reason these things came into being was not because the government wants to take away your freedoms. It's because there was a societal outcry of people being like, do something because people are dying.
It's in the nature of protecting the public good. I mean, that's why we have a government, and that's why the government powers are broad but not specific at the federal level. And so then it's like, but how far is that? Who's going to regulate what? Who's going to regulate this? When you make a post for your municipal government, are your posts adhering to the local laws of your government, or because you're using a platform that exists across the country, are you using more broad? Not that you're, I don't know what specific laws exist in your community. How specific can we get?
Yeah. I mean, yeah, traffic laws vary from state to state, even, but there is, like, general.
Yeah, no, actually, traffic laws are a great example.
Speed limits, roundabouts.
Wearing a helmet versus not on a motorcycle. Where's this standard? I think the real answer, though, Leo, is like, it's where the companies are based. So, like, if the headquarters for Meta is in California, right? Then Meta has to adhere to the state of California's laws as well as the United States, right? But what if Meta changes its headquarters to London? Then it's like, okay, do they still have to adhere to the laws in the United States? And I think the free market dictates, yeah, you want to do business over here, you got to follow our laws here too. You know what I mean? And that's why companies like Disney or whatever, that's why they'll like censor certain parts of their movies before they release it in
China,
in a Middle Eastern country or in China,
Yeah.
because they're like, well, we want to adhere to those laws so that we can get that money. So it's a sort of legal pandering, I guess, is what you can look at. And we also have public decency laws as well. You know what I mean? That's why you can't show a topless woman on Facebook, but a topless man is okay. You know, like there's public decency laws that are sexist. They are, you know, as many laws are in this country. So yeah, I guess there is a limit to what they can adhere, but those gray areas like hate speech or something that caused psychological distress, or really just things targeted at children. I think that's the other thing too, is how can you limit things that are targeted at children?
Yeah.
YouTube got into a lot of trouble for that.
Yeah,
for not regulating those videos.
The algorithm was sending them creepy, weird stuff. That's a really fine line to walk too, because free speech is the musician's, artist's best friend, right? You have the ability, the right to say what you want to say, and wherever your inspiration takes you, because it kind of comes together with like what we're talking about. It's like a limit to, but then again, you know, this is the whole problem with corporate entities being seen as individuals, because of LLC law. Like corporations are like, nobody's liable. It's a person, right? Like they have the same rights at the table as you or me, which is bananas. But
it's not a person, it's an entity.
An entity.
They're a singular entity, yeah.
Which gives them,
or a party,
the same First Amendment rights as Joe Schmo that wants to write a protest song.
Sure.
So that's a weird one, because as much as like we value the freedom of speech in order to create and communicate ideas, do we allow that same volume or those same rights to a corporation?
There's definitely an ethical concern behind saying corporations are people, especially when it comes to regulating certain things. You see that in the housing market when like Airbnb can just buy a bunch of houses in a community, and then they have to limit it. But you have to limit it. Like, okay, a company, an entity, a party cannot purchase more than 2 properties in a community. You know, like you own this. Well, you know what? That standard has to apply to people too. And in reality, that's really going to affect like super wealthy people on a majority level of that focus. You know what I mean? There's probably people out there whose whole life is they're property managers. They purchase property, they rent it out, they do provide housing. Say what you want about landlords, it is true. The rates at which they do it and how they maintain it goes into the quality of the landlord. You know what I mean? I'm not coming out as super pro landlord. I'm just saying like there's lines. But with music too, like when you work for a record label, if you're going to be a songwriter and you're writing music that's going to be owned by that label, how much of your intellectual property property rights are you giving up? There are basic rights that you can retain, but you can also sign those away in a contract in exchange for a paycheck. And that's a decision musicians have to make too, if that's the route they want to go. And damn, Leo, my lunch is like over, so like we're getting into the meat of it.
That's good. Yeah,
this is good, and I want to pick up there because I have so much to say, and I'm sure this is things we've already said before. And the topic I want to talk to you next time on a mini episode we do is about. I do want to talk about the Andy Warhol Foundation versus Goldsmith case. I want to talk about transformative use and copyright. I think if we had another hour, would have gotten there. But next time, I want to talk about the expectations of being a musician in today's day and age. Can you make a living can you realistically pay your bills, raise a family, own a house by being a musician? Spoiler, I would say no.
I'm gonna have to
For a
agree with you.
majority-
Agree
Yeah,
with you 100%
no.
on that. Yeah.
And I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing. I don't think it's necessarily a good thing, but I think there's a certain level of reality that creatives have to be okay with when it comes to music and that being a muse. You know what I mean? I mean,
And
you
whether
and I
or
both
not-
have full-time gigs.
Yeah, and whether or not you continue to participate in it, and like that's a realization. I think that's a part 2, baby. Freedom of speech.
Part 2.
Part 1, and that sounds good. No, I definitely think like you evaluating your relationship and the importance of music is like you will continue to be a creator and compose and write, regardless of the like if you're able to like have a sustainable life primarily just off of music.
Right.
I don't know anyone, and I know a lot of folks in the music industry that is just doing music as their main gig.
Same. I don't. I know. Actually, that's a lie. I know maybe 2 or 3 people, but they're in the production music world and they own their own companies, and they do not write for fun anymore. You know, there's a certain level of selling your soul a bit that comes with it, but it's doable, but not in the way you'd think.
Yeah.
So yeah. Let's talk about this on our part 2, man.
Right on, man. Yeah, this is great. I appreciate the insight